All right. Greetings, everyone. Sorry for the slight delay. We have quite a following online, and we're going to be recording this as well. One of the reasons why we are holding it in this huge theater, which I knew we would not be able to fill for sure, is because the recording system here is very good, and we have the cameras, so we'll be able to then, when it's put on YouTube, it will have a much longer life. So, first of all, really appreciate you coming during the middle of the day. Those of you who could make it, we realize it's not an ideal time for such an event, but because of time zones, we wanted to make it such that at least we are able to get people in Europe who are joining, and also on the West Coast, a few people as well who are interested. So, just to give you some background, my name is Salim Ali. I'm the chair of the Department of Geography here at University of Delaware, and I was really inspired to organize this event with my friend and colleague, Dr. Vikram Thakur, and also Dr. Sabrine Beg, and Dr. Nancy Boyer, and Dr. Kesser Shafi, who may join us online. He's in Spain right now. Because of the Stanford Dosti initiative, which we came across about 2 months ago. Stanford University had students from India and Pakistan who were very concerned about the lack of progress in terms of constructive dialogue between the two countries. And they held a conference called the Stanford Dosti Conference about a month ago. And so through that, I thought, well, let me see if I can try to get our faculty here from India and Pakistan together to work on this. And so that's how this came about. So it's been very impromptu and rushed in terms of the organization, but I'm really appreciative to the faculty who have been willing to join this effort. It's also opportune because we have recently launched a Peace and Justice Studies initiative, which Dr. Boyer has really championed, and we've had a new minor in Peace and Justice Studies. So it's also, I think, something that our students can benefit from in that regard, in terms of their intellectual experience here at UD. The other aspect of this, which is worth noting, is that the way we have approached this is it's a solutions forum. There's a lot which has been done around lamenting the past, about problems that have happened between the two countries. There's enough blame to go around. We do not want to rehash any of that. We really want to focus on the future. I'm trained as a planner. I'm very much focused on the future. We need to figure out a way forward. So what I've requested our speakers to do is really focus on those solutions. How can we move the conversation to the point where we can actually engage with each other and resolve this conflict between India and Pakistan that has been festering now for more than a generation now. It's 2 generations, 70 plus years. And to do this, we've divided this session into two segments. The first part is track one, we're calling it, which is essentially focusing on the government to government relationship. That's what track one is about. In international relations, we refer to that as track one. And then track two is people to people relationships, which are focused more on issues around science and culture. And we'll also see where there's a track 1.5, maybe, where there's a bridge building which can happen along the way. So that's the plan, and the format will be 10-minute presentations by each of the panelists, and then we're going to have some conversations collectively and online with questions. And then we'll move on to track two, and then hopefully have some time for wrap up moving forward. Our goal is that after this initiative, we will also put this online. We will send it to influential media circuit and all. And I didn't purposely advertise it too much in the current environment to certain constituencies, because any kind of effort at peace building gets also, unfortunately, misrepresented, and I didn't want this to be hijacked, which can happen. I've been involved in many peace efforts between our two countries, which have been hijacked by people who have stigmatized the organizers or have done other kinds of nefarious activities. So we've had to be very careful about that. So in some ways, it's good we have a small audience in that regard, because you can otherwise have more heat than light generated if you have that kind of dynamic. So without further ado, we're going to first hear from Michael Kugelman, whom many of you will know is one of the most distinguished voices in the think tank arena of Washington, D.C., talking about South Asia. For many years, he was directing the South Asia program at the Woodrow Wilson Center, and then recently has moved to his role at the Atlantic Council as the director of South Asia. And he's someone whom I have admired for years. I've known Michael now for, I think, more than 15 years, and have been amazed at how much composure he brings to the most intractable topics. He's a celebrity on the social media circuit, if you follow South Asian social media, but he handles it with utmost humility. So I have great regard for him. So Michael, please, if you can come over and share your thoughts for about 10 minutes, and then we'll move on to our next speaker.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Salim. It's really an honor to be here, to be back here on the University of Delaware campus. I want to congratulate you, Salim, as well as your colleagues for convening this this very important discussion. Yeah, I think as analysts and scholars and advocates, we should never take the simple approach or the simplest approach of concluding that a problem is intractable and just focus on why it's intractable. Ultimately, that doesn't help, right? We should also dare to think about what it would take to break through that intractability and get to some viable solutions, even if they can only realistically emerge a bit further down the road. History, as this audience would know, is rife with examples of problems that were deemed intractable that managed to be resolved. Some relatively recent examples are the conflicts in Northern Ireland, the war in Colombia, the first Middle East peace accord between Israel and Egypt, apartheid in Africa, the Cold War. There are many other examples as well. And one could argue that the India-Pakistan problem is uniquely intractable, but that's not why we're here today. We're here to discuss ways forward. And so maybe it's useful to start by asking why we should dare to be thinking about this idea of pathways, peace pathways. And especially now when we keep hearing that this is an especially bad time for India-Pakistan relations. And it is, that's true. The last conflict between India and Pakistan, the one that happened a year ago to this day, in fact, pretty much, was one of the most intense in years and in terms of level of hostilities. Also, the Indian side imposed a series of non-military punitive actions like closing down the border and all trade, and in an unprecedented step, suspending the Indus Waters Treaty that had not happened before. All these remain in effect now, 1 year later. And also, one could argue that each side has imposed conditions for talks that the other side is unlikely to agree to anytime soon. So this may all be true, but maybe I'll highlight very briefly 3 reasons why we can and should still dare to think about moving forward and possible pathways for a better situation between these two countries. First is precedent. If you look at the history of India-Pakistan relations, there have been periods of better ties following periods of conflict. Typically, that's entailed scaled up commercial ties, the establishing of more trade, more border customs facilities, and so on. That might seem especially unlikely right now, given that the border is essentially closed and all trade has been suspended. But that doesn't mean that there won't eventually be windows to reopen cross-border movements, both in terms of people and products. And that type of cooperation could potentially be used as a confidence building measure for something bigger further down the road. A second reason to dare to think about moving forward and pathways toward better things, peace, is leadership. This may also seem odd, given that neither side's leadership these days, and especially, neither side's leadership these days appears particularly inclined to receptivity to talks, much less peace talks. But again, I think we need to be thinking about not just today, but the future. There will be a new generation of Indian and Pakistani leaders emerging in the coming years. All you need is that visionary set of leaders, the one willing to do what we are so often told cannot actually be done. And it may not be a leader that we expect. It might have seemed hard to believe that a military dictator, Pervez Musharraf, would be the Pakistani leader associated with the last real effort toward India-Pakistan peace. And it might have seemed hard to believe that a hardline figure like Narendra Modi would be the last Indian prime minister to visit Pakistan. And as an analyst, I often see public opinion data and other surveys indicating that younger generations of Indians and Pakistanis take a more rigid position than do their parents' generation when it comes to the idea of India-Pakistan peace. But that's not to say that the next generation of leaders won't produce another visionary ready to pursue peace. And the third reason to dare to think more positively about this difficult relationship is reality, pure and simple. I mentioned earlier how relations today are in a particularly bad place. There's not much dialogue going on at all, aside from the DGMO hotline, the Director General of Military Operations hotline, which has never not been open between India and Pakistan, even during wartime. But some of you probably saw reports just over the weekend, mainly in the Indian media, indicating that there have been a few track two style engagements over the last few months between former Indian and Pakistani government officials and military officers. And the motivation, according to these reports, is especially coming from the Indian side because of a desire to avoid future escalations. Um, and that is in part because of the Trump administration's close relationship with Pakistan, close relationship with Pakistan, and particularly the Pakistani military, and a fear in New Delhi that if there's another conflict, the Trump administration would not pressure the Pakistani side to pull back from hostilities. Now, if this is true, it would be a pretty significant development. It would suggest if this development were to lead to formal back-channel discussions between New Delhi and Islamabad, or more likely Rawalpindi, that there could be another opening for dialogue and confidence building measures that come with that. So let me, as I wrap up, turn to the issue of what could conceivably be done to develop some possible peace pathways moving forward. And I'll focus on the core of the problem, and that is, of course, Kashmir. Now, frequently in the panel discussions that I take part in, public engagements, I don't talk about Kashmir because it is such a difficult issue to discuss, right? I think this audience would know in particular, it's a very emotive issue for reasons that I think we can all understand. So I'm not going to try to offer detailed recommendations for how to fix the Kashmir problem. Some folks might say they'd want to try. The U.S. president recently said that he'd like to try to fix the Kashmir issue. But for me, I think it's most realistic to look at this as not a case of digging in on this problem, on this challenge, but more so stepping back and simply accepting and formalizing the status quo. This is, of course, not an acceptable formula presently for the two sides, but it's, in my view, the simplest solution to accept the current borders, to accept Kashmir as it is, to accept the LOC as it is, and to move on. So I was speaking at a public event in Karachi several years ago, and I dared to make that very recommendation. I'm not sure how it came up. I don't remember what the context was, but I said that maybe it's time to try to move on from Kashmir. I feared after I said that I was afraid I'd get heckled or shouted off the stage. But to my surprise, the audience broke out in applause. The only person that essentially rejected my idea was my fellow panelist at the event in Karachi. And this was a retired member of a certain institution in Pakistan. You could probably guess what institution. My point is that there is actually a public constituency, even if a modest one, in favor of what appeared to me to be one of the more logical potential fixes to the India-Pakistan conundrum. And if you look at the four-point formula that Musharraf came up with some years ago, was essentially about accepting the status quo. But to get to this point, obviously, many things would need to happen first, starting with a much better bilateral climate that would allow for that would allow for significant levels of dialogue and CBMs. And to get to that better bilateral climate, you need to get back to where things are when the relationship between India and Pakistan is relatively stable, which it was, one could argue, in the few years before last year's conflict, and especially during those 4 years after the new LOC truce in February 2021. A better bilateral climate entails having open borders, some trade. It entails having some forms of regular, even if limited dialogue. It entails avoiding provocations, aside from the usual bluster and ugly rhetoric that marks relations even during the relatively better periods and tides. And I think there's also would need to be address long-standing grievances aside from Kashmir, which could further improve the bilateral climate. Well, let's remember that, at least in my view, even if there were to be an understanding or an arrangement or an agreement reached on Kashmir, that doesn't necessarily mean that there would be peace, because there would be other grievances in it besides Kashmir. One of them involves water, which of course is something that Salim knows a lot more than I and most others in this room. Even when the Indus Waters Treaty was in place, there were disagreements over it and calls to renegotiate it due to changes related to demographic environmental changes that arose in the decades after the agreement was first signed in 1960. There have been concerns on the Indian side about issues with the volume of river water allocated to the Pakistani side per the agreement. But of course, the first step before you can get into the Indus Waters Treaty is to have it in place, which it is not at the moment. Another longstanding grievance, of course, relates to the issue of terrorism. Um, Indian concerns about terrorism, I would argue, tend to get a bit more attention in much of the analysis and commentary in the West. India's concerns about anti-India militants like Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed that it's long accused Pakistan of sheltering and sponsoring. Pakistan has its own concerns about terrorism, and it accuses India of sponsoring anti-Pakistan militants, especially Baluch insurgents, but also Islamist terrorists like the Pakistani Taliban and its allies. So I'm not here to say whether these allegations are right or wrong, but I will say that these issues will need to be addressed in order to create a better climate to have talks on the most meddlesome issue of all, that being the territorial issues, particularly that involving Kashmir. Now, of course, India's current posture, the Modi government's position for some time is no talks with terror, which suggests it won't have dialogue with Pakistan until it's convinced that Pakistan's no longer supporting terrorists that threaten and target India. But as I noted earlier, we've seen indications that in recent days that New Delhi is now concluding that there might need to be some sort of back channel dialogue with Pakistan. Back channel dialogue may be back channel, but it's also dialogue. And there's always the possibility that that could lead to a more formal dialogue, though certainly that can take some time. So I'll pause there for now. Thank you.
Any clarifying questions for Michael up front now? We can have a discussion later. Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Michael. Our next speaker is Prabha Sankarayan, who is the CEO of Mediators Beyond Borders. I've had the good fortune of serving on the board of Mediators Beyond Borders International, which she has really made into a powerhouse organization with global reach. And she works not just in South Asia, but all over the world. And she can share some of those comparative perspectives with us as well in terms of peace building and conflict resolution and mediation particularly. And what I've asked Prabha to do specifically is to now, the stage being set with Michael laying out, what could be some of the points of negotiation around, any kind of mediated settlement if we were to go with mediation, or whether mediation does not have a role to play. That too we can discuss. So with that, Prabha, thank you for coming all the way from Pittsburgh, and we look forward to your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Salim, and thank you for creating this opportunity and the Solutions Forum for this discussion and this space that affords us a much needed moment in time. It's an understatement to say it's a difficult time in South Asian history, as Michael so eloquently laid out. In 2025, two nuclear powers crossed into direct kinetic conflict, the images were alarming. The rhetoric was absolute, and the risks were global. And yet something quieter also happened. Even during that escalation, dialogue never fully disappeared. Track 1.5, Track 2 conversations continued quietly through academic institutions, through civil society networks, through diplomatic back channels, and through technical experts. That matters, because peace is not simply the absence of war. It is a process and an infrastructure. Peace is built deliberately through systems of communication, trusted intermediaries, technical cooperation, and sustained human relationships capable of surviving political shocks. And we have done that over the decades. Perhaps most importantly, and I'm going to begin to shift a little bit here to what is possible, the glaciers do not recognize a line of control. I want to propose that the Hindu Kush Himalaya region, what many now call the third pole, may offer one of the most important sovereignty neutral pathways for our future cooperation. Not because it removes political disagreements, not because it reframes survival itself as a shared interest. And as mediators, I know that shared interests are often where meaningful movement begins. So this third pole is not simply a geographic description. It's a strategic diplomatic framework. This region encompasses the Hindu Kush, the Himalayas, the Karakoram, the Tibetan Plateau, and stretches across 8 countries, including India and Pakistan, serving as the source of 10 of Asia's largest river systems, including the Indus, the Ganges, and the Brahmaputra. Nearly 2 billion people, a quarter of the world's population, depend on these waters for agriculture, food security, and energy. And the science is deeply concerning. The reality is also that this region is warming at twice the global average. Glacial retreat, terms like GLOF, which I have learned about in the last 8 years, glacial lake outburst floods, erratic monsoon behavior, and water insecurity are accelerating across borders that climate systems themselves do not recognize anymore. If those water systems fail, they fail for everyone. That's why the third pole matters diplomatically. What it allows us to do in mediative practices is to shift the conversation away from contested sovereignty and towards a cooperative survival. Science diplomacy creates a rare form of neutral ground. No nation is asked to surrender its identity, no government is asked to abandon dignity, but all parties are invited to confront a shared reality and a shared set of possibilities. And sometimes shared vulnerability becomes the first foundation for shared responsibility. That might seem unlikely under the present circumstances, but as I will share, other contexts lead us in that direction. So peacebuilding history teaches us something extremely important. I'm going to choose 3 of them. In the early stages of conflict transformation, clarity is not always the highest virtue. This might seem counterintuitive, but sometimes constructive ambiguity creates the political space necessary for cooperation. The Good Friday Agreement demonstrated this powerfully. Parties with fundamentally different political aspirations agreed first to mechanisms of coexistence before resolving every question of identity and sovereignty. And one could say, if you've been to Belfast recently, those issues continue 25 years later. They are not resolved. And yet, what do we have? That agreement holding in many ways. So constructive ambiguity is not diplomatic weakness. It is the disciplined art of allowing progress without forcing premature political surrender. We have seen similar dynamics elsewhere. The Simla Agreement of 1972 created space for bilateral engagement while leaving difficult final status questions unresolved. The UN Resolution 242 sustained a diplomatic framework, this is in the Middle East, precisely because opposing interpretations were temporarily allowed to coexist. It helped that they were also in French and English. So that ambiguity continued. The lesson is simple. India and Pakistan do not need immediate consensus on every territorial or historical question, as Salim said, in order to cooperate on water security, on climate resilience, on disaster prevention, or scientific exchange, or even regional risk reduction. There are ways in which functional cooperation can precede political settlement. And importantly, trust is not a precondition for mediation. This might seem counterintuitive. I remember conversations with Hal Saunders after the Dayton Accords. He did a whole bunch of training about what it took. And he talked about the conversations continuing and continuing and continuing until we built trust in small measures. So trust is often the outcome of small successes. So what are the tools in our toolkit? As mediators, we learn quickly that sustainable peace processes require more than diplomacy. They require technical skills, contextual understanding, and an understanding, I believe, as a former therapist, of states of mind in conflict. A mediator must understand both the security concerns and the irrigation concerns, military anxieties and the community's anxieties, political dignity and the ecological reality. Mediators also require what one may call the capacity to absorb and transform in the heat of the containers and spaces we create, the ability to absorb the fear, given the history between our countries, the tension, the projection, and there are projections galore, and historical grievance without amplifying them, but containing them in that space that we create, in the moments in time that we create, becomes critical. And in South Asia, one question inevitably emerges. If the parties cannot agree on a traditional third-party mediator, what next? So here's a possibility, since this is a solutions forum. We stop searching only for a third party and begin by looking at a third way. Middle power facilitators such as Indonesia or Malaysia may offer greater political viability because they carry less geopolitical baggage than the major powers do. Their diplomatic traditions emphasize consensus, sovereignty, and regional coexistence. At the same time, organizations like mine, Mediators Beyond Borders International, and the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies in Siem Reap in Cambodia, can provide what states sometimes cannot. That's continuity, technical accompaniment, community trust, and sustained listening. At MBBI, we believe deeply in accompaniment rather than enforcement. The role of the mediator is never to impose solutions. Ask the greatest mediators around the world. What they did was listen and sit with the participants, with the parties, as the durable solutions emerged. So it is ours to create enough structure, safety, and process for the parties to discover durable solutions. And peace agreements become far more durable. All the research in the last 25 years tells us that. Far more durable when they include the voices of border communities, local leaders, scientists, engineers, women, and young people, not just the political elites. Because peace is sustained ultimately at the human level. So I want to suggest that science, diplomacy, and technical institutions may provide some supports. The future mediators may not be diplomats. They may be glaciologists, hydrologists, climate scientists, water engineers. Why? Because respected data can travel sometimes where political rhetoric cannot. It's possible The Indus Waters Treaty remains one of the most significant examples of this principle, and despite the wars, despite political crises, technical mechanisms and institutional monitoring survived for decades. Yes, it is suspended now, but it survived for all of the decades before that. The World Bank's role is another one. Technical collaboration creates these habits of communication that are necessary. Shared monitoring creates predictability, and predictability becomes important because it reduces fear. I talked about the states of mind in conflict. So often, the prefrontal cortex is captured by fear. It's captured by the histories. And ensuring that we create spaces in which we can continue to have dialogue become really important. So none of these diplomatic architectures will survive if they are disconnected from the human experience. We talk about track 1, track 1.5, track 2. What we believe is that beyond the geopolitics and the national narratives are ordinary people carrying grief, uncertainty, trauma, resilience, and the simple desire to live with dignity. I spoke with many of my colleagues living across the line of control on both sides over the last few weeks. For many communities living in a prolonged conflict, peace is not an abstract idea. What they keep reminding me of is it is deeply personal. Living amid persistent insecurity often means carrying both the visible and invisible trauma, while constantly being asked to prove one's humanity to competing political narratives. They sit there in the heat of the conflict and have to prove their humanity to the people who ask them to do so. They're not spaces spoken about. Why meaningful space, peace space matters. So we pay attention to the fact that they're not just spaces where people are spoken about, but spaces where they are listened to as knowledge holders of their own realities. Women, youth, educators, faith leaders, the border communities, the local peace builders. They are not peripheral voices, they are proximate to peace-building processes. They are essential to the durability of any agreement. Our work with regional partners has consistently shown that climate risks can become an unexpected bridge. And so what this creates is an opportunity for very practical cooperation, for creating joint community early warning systems, shared disaster preparedness mechanisms across both countries, cross-border scientific exchanges, local water sharing initiatives, and youth climate resilience partnerships. They may appear small. These small successes matter. They become proof that cooperation is possible and that it can become viral. And over time, these local models can strengthen formal diplomacy itself. So let me close with this. We've worked with Adaptation Without Borders over the last few years around the Hindu Kush waters. The glaciers of the third pole will not wait for the final political settlement. Neither can our diplomacy. If we cannot agree on every boundary, border, let us agree at least to protect the water. If we cannot resolve every grievance, let's reduce every preventable risk. History will not remember us for the power we accumulated, notwithstanding the current climate across the globe. We will be remembered for whether we had the wisdom to cooperate when survival demanded it. Look at the tragedies across both countries that are climate related. So I love Salim's call to us to move from the politics of grievance to the politics of survival, to the diplomacy of survival. Our true strength is not the ability to stand alone. It's the wisdom to choose the right partners for survival. And who better than our brothers and sisters across the border? Thank you.
Thank you, Prabha, and also for linking to the environment, which, as you know, is very significant for the hosting platform of this event. Apart from our Department of Geography, the United Nations University's Institute for Water, Environment and Health has co-sponsored this event. And in fact, we're using their Teams platform. So special thanks to the director of that institute, Dr. Kaveh Madani, who's Iranian actually, and is himself going through this trauma of conflict right now. But when I shared with him this idea, and I mentioned that you plan to speak about water and climate, he was really excited. And so this is going to be shared through the United Nations University Network as well. Now, our third speaker, Sir Partha Das Gupta, he was going to join us live online, but because his wife is undergoing surgery today, he still wanted to participate, so he has recorded his message for us. He was in conversation with me and Dr. Sabrine Baig, who is herself an economist. And this is a very good transition from talking about science diplomacy to an institutional example of how especially economics and social science diplomacy has played out through an organization that he started. And so I'm going to play his video message. It's a conversation which we just spoke to him on Friday, Sabrine and myself. We will then be able to also, he's willing to have questions later addressed if there are any for him. And he's also volunteered. He said he would like to actually use this forum as an opportunity to lobby for this kind of intervention. He's someone with enormous influence in academia in South Asia and globally. He's knighted, of course, Sir Partha Das Gupta, professor at Cambridge, and then also has received, I think, India's highest honor, one of those national awards that is there. And he said, if at this stage in my career, if I can do anything to put in a good word, he said he would really want to support us on that. So that's very refreshing. So here is the message conversation. We are so honored to have Sir Partha Das Gupta with us today.
Perfect. Now we can hear.
Among his many laurels, which are too long to enumerate here, the one that is relevant here is that he's the founder of a network called SANDI, the South Asian Network of Development and Environmental Economics. And this network has been pivotal in science diplomacy in the region, particularly between India and Pakistan, where researchers from these countries have not had an opportunity to interact with each other because of, unfortunately, the political tensions. But SANDI has allowed for a safe space for this to occur. So in order to move forward with this short intervention from Sir Partha, who is not able to join us in real time, but is offering this recording for our symposium, I'm going to request Dr. Sabrine Baig to ask him some questions. And of course, Sir Partha, we would welcome your comments more generally as well. So thank you again for joining us. Over to you, Sabrine.
Thank you, Salim, for introducing our honorable guest, Sir Partha Das Gupta, and thank you, sir, for joining us. So since we have limited time, let me just start by starting with SANDI, which brought together researchers from across South Asia, including India and Pakistan, around shared interests in development and environmental challenges. What lessons from building that network and your experience with it do you think would apply more broadly to peace building in the region?
Wow, that's a tough one. I wasn't involved in peace building. My colleague, Carl-Johan Mehler, is deceased. He was a giant of a personality and a great economist himself. He and I were both very much interested in teaching, and he was a born teacher. He published far less than he produced, but he produced it through students. Anyway, he and I were given a large grant by the MacArthur Foundation back in 1995 or 6, or thereabouts, largely because I got to know the MacArthur Foundation's, one of their directors, through a great physicist. Would you believe it? This is how, how these things travel, these ideas travel across disciplines, by the name of Murray Gell-Mann, very, very famous physicist. He was a member of the board of the MacArthur Foundation, and he got to know me, or rather, I got to know him, and he decided he was also a conservationist, so he thought that perhaps the MacArthur Foundation could throw some money at my direction for teaching purposes, which is what I wanted to do, bringing environment, natural capital into economic discourse. That's something I'd been very keen on even then, and I was doing it, but nobody was listening at that time. Anyhow, so I directed that money towards Carl Mailer because he and I were very close colleagues, and he ran an institute in Stockholm. So that's how it began.
You mentioned environmental challenges and as well as knowledge sharing, but I would like to push us a bit from that knowledge generation and sharing to practice. And so most of the challenges such as climate change, water management, pollution are regional challenges and shared challenges or vulnerabilities, and no single country can sort of solve it alone. So I believe that the research again needs to be regional, but also do you think this cooperation in the academic space can be brought to the practice space and increase engagement between the countries in the region, as well as possibilities for cooperation?
Well, the answer has to be yes, but I didn't tackle that at all. Very, very, very good reason. I wasn't that ambitious. I don't have the contacts or the facilities, financial facilities, to be able to engage in regional work. It was small scale. I concentrated on discussing ecosystems, the economics of ecosystems. Small ones, it could be a patch of grassland, it could be a lake, it could be coral reef, and so forth. And I did that. The attention was in that direction because for the reason that you were hinting at. You see, when we think about climate change and nature these days, these two are buzzwords in the sense of climate change on the one hand, nature as though climate is not part of nature. So I find that very difficult anyway to understand. But just take it, if you think of management of natural capital, attention goes to climate change because people have been talking about climate change, governments are talking about climate change, and it's an international issue. The problem is that the reason I haven't myself done any work on climate change is because it's a public goods problem. It's climate's everybody's climate. No individual can affect it. And what I was interested in exploring is how do we create institutions, local institutions, to manage local ecological problems? It won't be the climate. It could be mitigation issues, that's for sure. Or it could be managing your own wetland, or cleaning up your own river. So the program that Mailer and I began working on and taught about was really not about climate at all. And there's enough money in climate anyway. Others are working on it. There's large-scale modeling of the climate system. But more importantly, the individual has very little effect on climate. So the incentive structure is not there. But on the other hand, there's a lot that one can do in your own back garden, as it were. And if everybody manages his own back garden well, there'll be a huge lift on biodiversity, for example. So that was the attention.
Great.
I don't know if this makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Maybe if I can just interject on one point here is, there is an organization called ICIMOD, which you are probably familiar with,
Yep.
the
Yes,
International
indeed.
Center for Integrated Mountain Development in
Yep.
Kathmandu. And as I understand it, Sandy's secretariat for some time was also connected with them. And I'm wondering if you can comment on especially the fact that, the Himalayan ecosystem, the larger, greater Himalayan ecosystem, has now become a source of a lot of the narratives of conflict. So when we talk about water wars, the glaciers are melting and so on and so forth.
Yes.
And what role could Sandy play in trying to have more convergent dialogue around the importance of economic integration and understanding of these issues in a more transboundary way? Is that something that you may see as a prospective area moving forward?
It is, in fact, Sandy is working in that direction. Why do you think Sandy is in ICIMOD? That's because I went and lobbied ICIMOD. EC Mode initially didn't want Sandy. It's a social science institution, whereas EC Mode is very much geology, the physical, the geological sciences, rightly so too. And it's a very powerful institution. It's a very good one, extremely good one. It's sort of our, the guardian of the Himalayas and all the river systems that come out of it. Goes without saying, they're terrific. But it was about 10, 12 years ago that Mailer and I approached them to see whether we could find a house for Sandy, home for Sandy there. Until then, it was sort of vaguely in AIT, the Asian Institute of Technology location. Of course, they were skeptical because, social science, hard scientists worry as to whether there can be dialogue there. But it happened, and they are there. That's their home now. And in fact, the Sandy celebrated its 25th anniversary in December, and it was held in Kathmandu. The celebrations were the celebration means symposium, a conference. So it's well grounded there. Now they are working. It takes quite a while for independent researchers, small scale researchers, and that's what Sandy is about. It was, as I described, it was to tap individual researchers in South Asia to work on their local problems. Now, it takes time for such an institution to then amalgamate with or have a large project with the physical scientists. But it's happening. There certainly are now in dialogue as to how to. But that should be our goal, certainly. Sandy has a big role to play for that incredible watersheds that are created from the Himalayas. Yeah, it hasn't happened yet. But you can't expect it to happen in a year, few years. We're looking at a very long drawn research project with lots of people involved in it, lots of types of people with different expertise, soil, water management, so forth. So yes, that will happen.
And just as a quick follow-up to that, is there, the economic case for cooperation in South Asia, is that something that we could have a case made through Sandy? So, for example, people have raised the point in terms of how much the conflict between India and Pakistan has cost both countries. Of course, there's the military expenditure, which is separate, but just in terms of not being able to have integrated energy systems, not being able to have water sharing, which is most efficient. Is that an area you have looked at, or one which should be potentially?
It should be. Yeah, absolutely. It should be. It hasn't happened. Again, for the same reason as I've been repeating, which is Sandy doesn't have that kind of financial capability of pulling together a large, like, for example, there are these gigantic climate models. How did they happen? That required quite a lot of investment, financial resources. Sandy just doesn't operate in that scale at all. Now, that's not a reason for it not, we shouldn't take it for granted that it'll remain so. But it is for us, people like you and I, to publicize the fact that, yes, there is an institution which could be made to look at these gigantic problems, but it doesn't require the resources. So if somebody says, well, there's nobody out there, that's not right. That's completely untrue. So, and in any case, Sandy is not a cast in iron, the membership. It's a name, it's a brand, and you can join it if there's a project. So yes, I would say this is the right time for that to happen. But it requires of people like you and me and our colleagues to push for a movement like that, and lobbying politicians to see whether there can be cooperation.
Thank you so much for your time. And I guess you have very rightly pointed out that while we're interested in this cross-border collaboration, but there also needs to be a lot more work in cross-discipline and cross-field collaboration in order to encourage something beyond that and taking it to policymakers in the political space.
Sir Partha's comments are a good transition now from track 1.5 to track 2. And we are very honored also to have joining with us the director of the International Center for Theoretical physics. Let me just make sure he is able to join. Professor Atish Dabholkar, can you hear us and see us? Where is it? Let's see. Okay, yes, greetings. Thank you so much for joining. Professor Dabholkar has kindly also made this event part of the Salam Centennial, and he will be formally introduced by my colleague Vikram Thakur. But I should mention that Dr. Abdus Salam, who was an eminent physicist and Nobel laureate, he established a center in Trieste, Italy, called the International Center for Theoretical Physics, that was aimed at essentially scientists from the developing world. And Dr. Dabholkar is now the director of that center. It is under UNESCO, so he's also UNESCO Secretary, Under Secretary General. I think he has an important title with UNESCO as well. And and he is, of course, also of South Asian origin. So he's got multiple connections to this topic. So Vikram, if you can please come forward and take us to now track 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Salim. Thank you, Atish, for joining us. Welcome, everyone. Yes, it's both my pleasure and an honor to introduce Dr. Atish Dabholkar for everyone. And I have never met him personally, but there's an interesting connection, and that's Pune, the city of Pune, which is where he was born and brought up. And his family connection to science and rationality as an approach to life is very well established. I mean, his uncle Narendra Dabholkar was a living legend in promoting rationalism and a rational approach to life. And in some ways, we don't have to think of science and culture as separate things. Actually, one flows from the other. And in a lot of ways, I mean, exactly, I mean, Narendra Dabholkar's life or Atish's own work is a reflection of that. So yeah, Atish earned his master's in physics from Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur. And he later got his PhD in theoretical physics from Princeton University. And as my senior colleague Salim introduced, he's currently working as the director in Italy. And this is a very interesting part that, I introduced this idea of Atish's uncle, because Atish's own connection to an institute whose founder was a Nobel laureate from Pakistan. I mean, you can't have more coincidences. And I'll now invite Atish to take over from here, because despite, I mean, so one of the big strengths, and I don't want to wade into politics, but I mean, when, so I was aware of an MTech from Tehran University. He used to work here as a food cart guy and as an assistant because his wife was a postdoc here. And so you may think of these places, in Kanpur or in Mumbai or Karachi, I mean, LAMS, for example, or in Tehran as like small time institutions. In terms of budgets, they're a fraction of what University of Delaware offers. But in terms of talent, hard work, and an innovative approach to life, I think that is the interesting part. And I'll now invite Atish to share some more lights on what are the potential that we can, work together on science and technology. So that's it. Thank you and welcome, Atish. Yes.
Thank you, Vikram. Thank you, Salim. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, yeah, good.
Okay, very good. No, so I think as was introduced, I'm a theoretical physicist myself, like Abdus Salam. And so one might ask, what can I say at this meeting, which is tackling this very difficult and weighty questions of politics and diplomacy and mediation. But I think what I'm going to say segues very nicely with what the previous two speakers spoke about. So I think what I want to do is summarize a little bit about what ICTP does and what I see the role of ICTP in the future and how it can impact these questions that we are trying to address. Because I think ICTP, apart from doing very high quality research, and I will tell you more about it, it also has a role in science diplomacy. And of course, it would be naive to think that science diplomacy can resolve very difficult conflicts of this kind. But the experience of ICTP has given us some hope that even if it cannot resolve it, actually it prepares the ground and it can promote dialogue. And I was mentioned in the previous talks, you can move from grievance-based politics to survival-based politics, or open the channels of collaboration where instead of contested sovereignty, you're talking about cooperation. So in fact, it's quite interesting that when I became the director, is particularly relevant to this. So Saddam, as you know, was born in the undivided India before independence. And he was, then he wanted to really go back to Pakistan to do physics. He went to Lahore Government College, and he found that he had to make this choice between, he could not really pursue physics there, and which is why he decided to found International Center for Theoretical Physics. And the idea being it's an international hub where scientists from all over the world can come together to talk about science. And you might ask, what implication does it have to the discussions that we are having today? So to begin with, from a personal point of view, it was quite interesting. When I became the director, a number of newspapers from India actually interviewed me, and some TV channels. And many of them, the first question they asked me was, how does it feel to be the Indian director of an institute which was founded by a Pakistani, the founding director was a Pakistani physicist and you are an Indian physicist? And my answer was that, in fact, that is what is really the mission of ICTP. That's really the beauty of ICTP, that an Indian-born theoretical physicist leading this center, which was founded by a Pakistani-born theoretical physicist, pointing to the universality of science and some of the common bonds that we share. So ICTP's mission since then has grown, and we bring in something like 6,000 scientists from all over the world every year. We have contributed to something like 5 Nobel Prizes, not only in theoretical physics, but also the Climate Nobel Prize. Some of our scientists took a major part in it. But fundamentally, about 2/3 of our scientists from developing countries. And that is where I think the role of ICTP can be relevant for today's discussion. Because just to give you some numbers, we have had something like 15,000 scientists from India coming to ICTP, and roughly about 3,000 scientists coming from Pakistan. So if you go by the ratio of the population, it's roughly equal. And pursuing excellence, so ICTP's bar is the place where you can see a Pakistani physicist talking to an Indian physicist, sharing the common language. They may disagree about, they may be passionate about cricket, but the teams in cricket teams, but they share this common bond. And this is really the spirit of ICTP. To give you the importance of ICTP in the current environment, I would like to point out that already in 1964, one of the major schools in conferences, international conferences in plasma physics, took place in Trieste at ICTP. And you can imagine plasma physics in the days of the fusion bomb was a very hot, sort of hot button topic. But ICTP we are a UN organization, and we were able to bring together physicists, leading plasma physicists from the Soviet Union, China, and the United States could meet on neutral platform for the first time, perhaps in their life, at Trieste. Now, this is the spirit of ICTP, which when I became the director, one of the questions that I asked myself is that what is the relevance of ICTP in today's world? And in fact, I came to the conclusion, which is quite relevant to today's discussion, that in fact, the challenges that we face today, of course, unfortunately, the nuclear challenge has not left us. It has, if anything, it has become worse. And there the tensions are extreme and the dangers are extreme. But we are now confronted with bigger challenges like the climate challenge. And so in sort of keeping true to Salam's original inspiration, I asked myself, what should be the role of ICTP in the years to come? And with that in view, we have identified a couple of important strategic priorities. And one of them is the International Science Alliance, and the other one is an International Consortium for Scientific Computing. Now, what is the International Science Alliance? As I said, and as was mentioned also by the previous speakers, there are actually challenges like what is happening with the glaciers. And this is something that I also say in my discussions with policymakers and scientists, that glaciers or heat waves or monsoon does not respect national boundaries. Because as far as climate is concerned, the Himalayas are just a boundary condition, on the Navier-Stokes equation. So it doesn't matter which part belongs to China and which part belongs to India and which part belongs to Pakistan. So this is a place where actually, as we said, we are unfortunately, despite having this godlike science and technology, somehow our psychology is still governed by this kind of very reptilian fears. And in fact, if a Martian came from outside, they would find it very, very strange that these human beings are fighting over a small piece of land when possibly in 20 years, there could be very big climate disasters that can really wipe out everybody. But that there is also a possibility of hope in the following sense that, for example, at ICTP, I recently signed an agreement with the Ministry of Environmental Science, Earth Sciences of India, to renew a collaboration that we used to have. And what we used to do was to hold monsoon workshops at ICTP. And as we said, so this is something, it's an idea that not only is a good one, but it actually can be put into practice, and we have been putting into practice. So the monsoon workshops at ICTP, International Center for Theoretical Physics, are the only place where scientists from Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, China, and Nepal, they can come together to discuss the monsoons. And this has been an extremely successful collaboration because they need to share data, they need to share the climate models, and this is what ICTP offers. So I'm really optimistic from that point of view that perhaps even though we cannot resolve these political questions and we cannot initiate mediation at the political level, these problems belong to the maybe United Nations General Assembly. But what we as scientists can do is create this platform, and ICTP offers such a, Sandy is an example that was mentioned earlier, but ICTP is a much larger platform, I would say, where, as I said, the scope of ICTP is quite large. We get, over the years, we must have had something like 200,000 scientists passing through ICTP. And it is a safe haven for science. Even today, you will find scientists from Ukraine and Russia and the United States and Iran and India and Pakistan in the same room discussing physics or discussing climate or discussing ecological disasters and preparedness, in case of disasters, disaster preparedness. So I think this is what I want to leave you with, is that I do believe that an institution like ICTP, which is quite a unique institution, I don't think there are any other in the world, where you are actually conducting frontline research in some of the most advanced topics in science, in a broad range of topics, some of them having to do with also computing is now going to become another challenge, and that's why we have the International Consortium for Scientific Computing. But these are the areas where possibilities of collaborations exist. In fact, they already are happening. And maybe there are ways that we can figure out to go from there to starting a mediation or a dialogue. There are examples of this kind. In fact, you might have heard about the Sesame project in Jordan, Now, of course, currently the situation is very bad, but it's a synchrotron facility in Jordan, supported by Israel, Iran, and Palestine, and other countries, Jordan. And this almost sounds like a news from an alternative universe that such a thing is possible. But actually, the idea started at ICTP, part of it. Also, at CERN was involved. ICTP actually funded one of the first major conferences in Dahad, where scientists from all these different regions could come together. And what looked like a pipe dream in those days actually was realized, and a quite fully functional facility does exist in Jordan. Of course, now currently the situation is so difficult that I don't think it is easy for them to continue. But the fact that something like that could come about gives us some hope that maybe also in the case of India and Pakistan, there could be areas of collaboration which might come out of our, given our tribal instincts as human beings, that we unite when we sense a common danger, even when we are fighting with each other. And I think greater awareness about this common danger, which is actually far greater than anything else. The climate crisis is really around the corner. And this could be perhaps a political motivator for people to think of coming together. And I think that's where an institution like a UN organization like the International Center for Theoretical Physics can play a very important role. So thank you.
Thank you, Atish. I'll invite our second speaker for today, second panelist, Sadia Khan, to please come and take over. So,
You can go ahead and just put the PowerPoint.
Okay. So one of our key objectives for second track to diplomacy is this idea of people-to-people contact, right? I mean, because ultimately, just when we say that it's North Korea and South Korea, and say it was one country and there's the Cold War legacy. So similarly, when we say people-to-people contact, here what Sadia's presentation will highlight is it doesn't matter whether you have 2 countries or 12 countries or 24 countries in the Indian subcontinent. People eat similar food, speak similar language, and have similar kind of ways of sharing their happiness on their lament through dance, music, and poetry. So Sadia is a person who wears many hats. She's a banker. She's also a cultural ambassador. So Sadia, welcome, and over to you.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Vikram, for a great introduction. I don't have the great credentials, but I'm happy to present today, SARS. So my name is Sadia Khan. I'm a founder of SARS Inc. So SARS is an Urdu word associated with musical instruments, and it means harmony. So it's a perfect fit for our organization, which promotes harmony and like connecting people together. So today I would like to share how much music, art, literature can fill the gap between both countries, which we share a very strong cultural heritage. Let me to the next slide. So a little bit background about myself. I was actually born and raised in Lahore, Pakistan, and I moved to States in 90s. I have bachelor's degree. I earned my bachelor's and master's in business. My bachelor's was in business administration, and graduated from Westchester University. I'm actually a banker by passion. I have really passionate for arts, and always that remains very passionate to me. Joy reading and photography. So some of the pictures you'll see are mine. They're taken this is the place I can just show my wealth. I live in Kennett Square, and I have two grown boys with my husband. I also an active member of Rotary Club, Longwood Rotary Foundation, and I'm been serving on the board for last 3 years. So a little bit about SARS. SARS was incorporated in 2012, and it's a Philadelphia-based organization. Our mission is to promote South Asian music, art, literature, by organizing vocal and instrumental concerts, dance performances, book readings, storytelling, and it's just connecting people together. The other goal, which is very important to me, is to introduce actually our youth and non-natives to the pleasures of our South Asian art and literature, because we live in US and we won't be here for that long. So the next generation has to take our legacy, our culture, and our art to the next level. So India and Pakistan share, they share deep historical, we are actually have a strong bond with each other through our culture, through our language, through lots of music. So the people continue to connect through dance, food. Food is an integral part of, because it's very similar. Like if you go to Punjab has Indian, if you go to North India, and if you go to Lahore and Punjab, so we have very similar food. And one of my really close friends, she comes to our home and she'll have, like, the names are different. So could be like, dal tadka or Punjabi dal, but it's the flavor and the aroma and it's so much similar that she tells me all the time, it feels like I'm in Chandigarh having the dal. So it connects people. So SARS creates opportunities for people from different South Asian backgrounds to come together and to appreciate art. Language is another element, like, Hindi, Urdu is so similar. Punjabi is like, it's the same spoken there in both countries. So even our architecture, our textiles, our traditions, our Mughal architecture is so familiar. The art I have at home, it's like, it just takes you back, to both of us. I have a painting which has kites on the sky, and it just takes you back, back time. And I think South Asian people, all of us, we can share the same sentiment. So we share rich musical heritage through instruments like tabla, harmonium, sitar, sarangi, bansuri. Same Sufism, literary traditions like Bulle Shah, like our poets, Faiz Ahmed Faiz, Iqbal. They were all part of, before partition, they all belong to us. Like either we are in Indian or we are in Pakistan, we share the same sentiment, same poetry, which resonates with us. Kathak also is another form of, it's an artistic tradition, which we have couple of events for SARS, which courtyard dancers performed for us. Courtyard dancers, Pallavi Chakravarti, she's very well renowned. She teaches dance in Swarthmore College. And we really have good partnership with her. So last event, which we did in 2025, so we partnered with them, and then they performed different Kathak, classical dances which was like amazing. So traditional storytelling, we had a Dastan Goi and Keech Chadda. He came from Delhi, especially to perform that event. And it was very, no, it's unfortunate he's no longer with us, but it was really an eye-opening event just because you just hear all the tales and stories about the era, like when it started with Amir Hamza, like, 8th century back. But back in those days, we didn't had any, we didn't even have film industry or music or anything. So the tales were just the imagination. And it's an interesting concept. So culture can basically, as you all said, culture can unite people, which unfortunately borders divide them. So we're there. Like I never thought that I had with this organization, I had everybody. I never thought that somebody's an Indian or somebody's a Pakistani. Everybody is the same. You're just talented. We're just mesmerized by the music with all the talent. It's exceptional. So these are the past events which we had. Like our first event was with Nazia Hassan, which you all know. It's like the pop singer in 80s. And I was a teenager at that time, and it was great. Nazia Hassan actually performed in India as well. Like that was one of the movies, Kurbani. Her song was Aap Jaisa Koi. So it was just, it's amazing that we all share the same sentiment. And then Mehdi Hassan Saab, he is a king of Ghazal. It belongs to both of us. Mehdi Hassan played with Lata ji. And it was it's awesome. And then we had Lollywood, relived Lollywood in 2013, Ghazal Mehfil, bridging cultural boundaries with Kotia dancers. That was our first event with Pallavi ji. Then the conversation with Raza Murmi with his book. And then Arun Bagal is he's one of really talented violinist. He lives in DC and he performed an amazing event for us. Rohini Ravda, she did a ghazal night for us and melodies from 80s with Swati. So that was a Bollywood night. So think about it, we had a Lollywood event, we had a Bollywood event. So it's just matter of we are so interconnected with each other. Dastan Goi, I already talked. Then Shahram Azhar, he's a political activist at that time, but right now he's a professor in I think in Buckley right now. And he performed a show for us with he sang Sahil Ludwani's songs. And then we had Richie Robinson. He's from Pakistan. And then also we are I actually want to have more Urdu programs because since I've been living in this country for last 30 years, I am actually I want people to learn about Urdu, especially I'm losing a little bit Urdu when I'm reading it. So I don't want to lose that. So to keep it alive. So we had a couple of our events, those events, then Facing East again, we partnered with Kotia dancers. So the last event is Philly Got Talent was this past weekend. And it was amazing just because we like to have local talent, and I'm encouraging youth now to get involved in it. So one of my friend's daughter, which is Sophia Tareen, she is, I think now, she works for a mayor's office right now. And she actually did residency last year with Sami Brothers. She completed that and she did a phenomenal job. She opened the show for us. And she told me that, before SARS, I used to have mehfils and ghazals at my home. And she said, like, we will come to your home and like you will have and it inspired her so much that like she went into singing. So it's unique that like, you know, this platform can inspire other people. So I just wanted to show some performers so you can see like we have variety of people, talented talent, which is amazing. So these are some of the um, flyers I put it out for our events, Arun Bagal. Then these are the dance performances. Afsana Raqs was interesting. And then Dastan Goi, our poetry nights. And then a conversation with Raza Rumi. So he wrote a book, Delhi by Heart. And if you have chance, you should buy the book. He showed actually his book actually emphasizes on how similar Delhi and Lahore are. So he's so much emotionally connected, going into Delhi, streets of Delhi, and Androon, like, you know, old Lahore. And they are so similar that it gives him so much nostalgia. So that shows basically how much we are connected with each other and how much music and art can basically connect us. And this platform is there. We can always have students. I always encourage students to come in and have like, you know, have this platform is always available to connect with people. That's my goal is. So this concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take.
Thank you, Sadia. That was a fabulous talk. You encapsulated thousands of years in such a neat and beautiful story. And our third speaker and panelist for today is Dr. Adim Sohail, the cultural anthropologist, and he's an assistant professor at Franklin and Marshall College. And he has an interesting connection. He's formally, right now, is working as an anthropologist, but in his previous avatar, he was trained as an engineer. He is from the city of Karachi. It's both our pride and our honor to have you as our speaker. To cover more areas of the shared cultural legacy and how that can lead us towards a more prosperous future and a stronger future ahead. Please.
You know, my ability to speak English fades after 5 o'clock, so I will not be as articulate. I know it's not 5 o'clock yet, but it graduates towards it. Thank you so much for this. The remarks I had prepared were for a different kind of a setup that I had imagined in my head. So I'm sorry if this is a little bit dissonant from all of the eloquence that we've seen up here. Like a coward, I will borrow from Fez to begin. Sort of at the end of one of his brilliant poems, which all of them are, he ends this poem. It's called Raqib Se. And he says, जब कभी बिकता है बाजार में मजदूर का गोश्त, शाहराहों पे गरीबों का लहू बहता है, आग सी सीने में रह रह के उबलती है न पूछ, अपने दिल पे मुझे काबू ही नहीं रहता है. Right? So, and my remarks today proceed in an intimate register, not from the perspective of an anthropologist, but as somebody amongst friends, amongst neighbors, right? Albeit in the strange land, right? As somebody from South Karachi, from Kemardi, that continues to model to this day, right, where I'm from, the cosmopolitanism, the pluralism, the generosity, and the worldliness that all Indian Ocean entrepreneurs cultivate, but that is sadly not represented within hegemonic forms of cultural production coming out of South Asia today. अपने दिल पर मुझे काबू ही नहीं रहता है. I can't control myself. We are assembled here, and I'm speaking sort of as a worldly South Asian, as most of us are, right? We're assembled here today at a very peculiar moment in history when the world is shifting beneath our feet. The US-led imperial order is in crisis. challenged by the steadfast resistance of the Palestinian people, the heroic defiance of sovereign Iran, and the rise of the worker state in China. But for us in South Asia at this time, the most urgent question is not simply what happens in Washington or Beijing. It is whether we will allow our region to be liberated or remain a battleground where imperial designs and our own internal hierarchies feed upon each other in this vicious spiral that we saw come to a head last May. If we understand today that imperialism is the principal contradiction shaping human possibility for survival, and we heard about climate change, we heard about sort of war and all the economic challenges our region faces. If imperialism is the principal contradiction shaping human possibility for survival today, then we must also see that the widening gulf between India and Pakistan is a secondary contradiction constantly inflamed to serve that principal one. The more we are at each other's throat, the easier it is for imperial powers to dominate our economies, our politics, and crucially, our imaginations. I want to lay out a proposition that cultural producers from our part of the world must work on sophisticated propaganda, right? We must work on both sides of the border to de-link ourselves from that toxic mimesis of racial capitalism that has infected our shared cultural acumen in the contemporary moment. For there to be peace, for there to be development in our region, cultural producers on both sides of the border must deliberately and systematically be partisans of an entangled vision of the future, one that is entangled with each other. I believe that cultivation of such an imaginary is the sine qua non and infrastructural to any constructive diplomatic dialogue towards peace in our neighborhood. For the past 20-25 years, the US imperial category of the terrorist has become synonymous with the Muslim body, and it has been smuggled into the South Asian cultural lexicon. A colonial stereotype, this racialized image of the Muslim terrorist continues to be reproduced in newsrooms, film scripts, and tired television shows in the imperial core. But sadly, it has also now fully infected mass culture in our part of the world. Even on the Pakistan side of the border, this same category has been cultivated in embodied forms by imperial proxies in Pakistan who midwife a cohort of young, nihilistic, lumpen expression of terror that were disconnected from mass politics, right, very systematically, and that are contemptuous of the potential of ordinary people, right? By invading our imaginaries and possibilities, capital's empire has long managed our affairs from afar. Our cultural producers must reject the trade in these categories and intervene in our cultural lexicon by expanding it beyond these. Our art must refuse to route our imaginaries of each other through the pathological perspective of a security consultant in Northern Virginia. When imperialism tells us who is a terrorist and who is an ally, who is civilized and who is barbaric, it is demanding that we abandon our centuries of shared heritage and our own ways of confronting and expressing our humanity. But imperialism does not land on a blank slate. In our part of the world, on both sides of the border, its designs articulate with the deep scourge of Jativad, of casteism, and Pidarshahi, patriarchy. Caste and patriarchy pervade all our regional cultures, no matter how much we mask it, and sits at the root of the toxic nationalism, ethnic chauvinism, and communalism that hold us back. This Brahmanical order, in all its occult and overt forms across our societies, gives a ready-made hierarchy into which imperial categories can be poured. So who is pure and who is polluting, who is loyal and who's an anti-national, who gets to speak for the nation and who can only appear as a security threat or as disposable labor. We must listen to Ambedkar. We must listen to Periyar, to Kabir and Bulle Shah, and to our revolutionary leaders who openly reject this disease that naturalizes social hierarchies. If we do not recognize, confront, and fight casteism that pervades all of our cultures, Our attempts at regional peace will be built on sand. A nationalism that rests on caste hierarchies will be weak and will easily catch the disease of imperial propaganda and capitalist exploitation. And thus, to recuperate our own imaginations for ourselves, our cultural producers must be explicitly anti-imperialist and anti-caste in explicit ways. They must recognize across the borders that the struggles of the Dalits, the Adivasis, of the colonized and oppressed nationalities in our neighborhood are connected. These are all us. As someone who grew up in Pakistan on a healthy diet of Hindi film cinema, I know keenly that we once had this, right? There was a time when Hindustani cinema gave us films like Garam Hawa and Naya Daur, Namak Haram, works that wrestled seriously with the partition, with class struggle, with the human cost of bigotry and inequality. When we used to watch these films in Pakistan, you know, like from Namak Haram, we were talking about this, Rajesh Khanna's working class hero, Somu, right? We saw in him ourselves, our uncles and their struggles in Karachi. But today, that same industry peddles terrible mimetic forms of muscular nationalist cinema that Hollywood developed. These forms that we see today were developed in Hollywood in the 1980s to wash away the absolute disgrace of the United States' mass rapes and genocidal crimes against humanity, and then eventual defeat in Vietnam, right? So the bug of Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger. We have imported from that defunct imaginary not only special effects, but also the jingoistic amnesia that Hollywood has used to evacuate critical thinking skills in the empty subjects that we confront in our classrooms all the time and fill them with humanistic content. I think here about sort of the sheer disappointment I felt with films like Dhurandhar and Uri, right? Ideological machines that fuse US-style imperial categories of the Muslim terrorist with a certain kind of a chauvinistic, casteist, and patriarchal view of the world. The film exemplifies, I don't want to beat up too much on the film. My original research is on Liari, so I feel it very sensitively, right? But the film exemplifies an emergent mood in the region where sort of hijras and Shia rituals are visualized as pollution, where peace slogans like Aman Ki Asha are feminized and thus mocked, and state violence slips into a certain kind of a moral duty, bearing histories of pogroms and occupations and caste oppression and imperial complicity in our region. We all know the comprador classes in both our countries. This problem that the Dhurandhar exemplifies, right, is not just an aesthetic problem, it's a political one. When the most powerful cultural machine in our region trains millions to cheer for surgical strikes, to thrill at the humiliation of the neighbor, to equate patriotism with revenge, it becomes very difficult to imagine peace, mutual peace, and to remember that our languages, our songs, our histories, and all the forms through which we express our happiness and sorrows are intertwined. Our cultural producers thus have an important part to play in reversing this tide that we have imported. We need to humanize our neighbors rather than caricature them. We need to find futures that are entwined with each other, right? We need to cheer the stars of liberation together, right? That Iran unleashes into the night sky, that recognizes Palestinian steadfastness as our shared human steadfastness, to not leave to them the task of human liberation, but to put in our bit. We who constitute together our ecumen, and we include Bangladesh and Sri Lanka and Nepal, we are the human majorities, yeah? So we need to find in the anguish of all proletarian struggles, of all anti-imperialist struggles, our struggles. We need to find in the plight of the garment workers in Faisalabad or the workers who were rioting a few weeks ago in Noida, that these are all our neighbors, that our struggles are entwined. We must see Srinagar or Gwadar as common expression of the same people dealing with the same project of unequal exchange into which we have been thrust for about 60, 70 years now. If imperialism is the principal contradiction, then building cross-border solidarities in South Asia is our strategy to achieve moksha from this Kali. And the route to that is actively imagine and mount mutualistic pathways into a just future. Thank you, guys.
We can now have Q&A also online. We have about 10 minutes or so. We've had a real coverage of the full scope of the issues around both the territorial aspects of the conflict, how we can potentially look for grassroots efforts like SARS, considering the external dimensions of imperialism, and of course, the superordinate goal of science, all bringing us together. So let's open it up to any questions, comments, again, trying to focus on what can we do tangibly. There were some specific solutions that I can identify and we will summarize later, but I would love to hear from others also who may have other solutions particularly too. So let's, yes, please, Dr. Ismat Shah, one of our great colleagues.
Thank you. Thanks to all the speakers that here listen to you. We are all familiar with it. We are all familiar with an old adage that enemy of an enemy is a friend of mine. And it seems weird to quote that at this meeting, but if you look at it from a different perspective, it means something totally different. What if we find a common enemy? Right? So a solution is to find a common enemy, and then by juxtaposition, you can see that there could be some friendly ties that could be established between the two original enemies. So to that, I think all of you have mentioned something, either from the cultural perspective, from Nehari and Dal and all of that, from SARS, to the imperialism and the passion of cricket and all of that. But I think the most important thing that has been mentioned before, at least from my perspective, is the environmental threat. That's a common enemy that ought to be in our headlights all the time now. In that respect, I think it is worth pointing out that water is a problem, and it is a certainly existential problem, but there's another existential problem that shows its head every single year, and that is our air. This is the same air that we breathe across the border, same air, right? In Lahore and in the whole Punjab, eastern and western Punjab, the air quality index goes up above 600 in the winter because we are blessed with this temperature inversion as well as some agriculture practices that we do. So that is a common enemy that we can focus on to work on. We started a program with the university in Amritsar, but unfortunately after last year, everything collapsed. But I think that's environmental issues that strike both the countries almost equally. 300 million people suffer from that air quality index issue. Our age expectancy is 20 years less than United States life expectancy. I mean, that's something that I think ought to be one of the most important points to be considered for a mutual program. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments on air? I should mention there is the Malé Declaration on Air Quality, but Sabrine also wanted to add.
Yes, instead of asking a separate question, I was just going to add that yes, the common enemy is the environment. And the main challenge is that the behaviors in one place can affect that place as well as across the border, right? So the crop fires in India will make the air in Pakistan bad, and water mismanagement in one part will lead to a drought or flood in another. So it's positive in the sense that it's a common challenge, but it makes it even harder because I wonder where we start that mediation process to solve that common problem.
Okay, great. And Professor Dabholkar, you're welcome to chime in on this as well. Yeah, so the question comment is around, is air quality potentially an area where we can try to foster cooperation? And noting that there was the Mali Declaration on Air Quality, which was passed at one time under SARC, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, which is defunct to a large degree. But perhaps maybe we'll start with you, Michael. If you can comment on the role of SARC and others, and especially you've endured the air quality in Delhi and Lahore recently too.
Yeah, I think most of us have. So I would, all I could do is agree with the comment about air. And I think we talk about the broader issue of environmental challenges in India and Pakistan. Some of them might not be as concrete for some, those that have the privilege of being able to be insulated from the effects of climate change. But I think that anyone, indeed, who lives in India and Pakistan, and particularly certain parts of it, Lahore, Delhi, and so on, it's impossible to escape the harmful effects of air. And that in itself should suggest that this is an urgent issue that, in theory, could be low-hanging fruit for some type of dialogue between Indians and Pakistanis, ideally first as a track two. Also, all I can do is agree on that. In terms of SARC, yeah, I mean, I don't want to say that SARC is dead, but I think that it's time to look for other mechanisms for the two sides to be able to engage. Pakistan is keen to, or has suggested a willingness or a desire to figure out ways to revitalize SARC. But clearly India has sought to move on. It's looking to capitalize on sub-regional entities like BIMSTEC and others. And of course, Pakistan is not a member of the likes of BIMSTEC and related sub-regional groupings. So as much as I respect the principles of SARC, and absolutely, if you look on the climate side or the environment side, there's a lot there. But given that India seems to want to go in a different direction from SARC now, I think that in terms of being practical about thinking of the future, it might be time to identify new mechanisms beyond a regional organization like SARC.
I was wondering, Adeem, if you can comment on this issue because you brought up the imperial imperative. And if we think about the issue of these organizations themselves, in some ways they can be thought of as, very agenda-driven imperial constellations. What is the way forward for regionalism for South Asia on issues like air?
Oh, I think there's other people here who can speak better to that. For me, the models, I think more abstractly about these things, which is that I was just thinking about sort of as Michael's speaking, the SCO or sort of whatever potential sort of these new alliances in the region sort of hold for a different imaginary of how our futures can come together, right? And within that, sort of these legacy institutions may not actually have a role to play, right? But I think the ways in which the degradation of both the role of the United Nations as well as many of the associations, many of the institutions affiliated with it, and international law has taken over the past 2 or 3 years, it means that, for me, that strategies of mutual development and mutual belonging and conversation, right, that always had to be routed through these legacy institutions. Now everything is fair game, right? So, but for that, sort of internal contradictions within the United States, within Pakistan and India have to be overcome towards building those institutions. And they can come under any given rubric. I think this is the time for intense and radical experimentations in both these countries. And so we should not, in many ways, history has thickened at this conjuncture, which means we are also sort of absolved of posing fidelity anymore to sort of legacies of the past, that for which any dialogue for peace between India and Pakistan had to be routed through Washington. I think we can talk to each other through our neighbors as well. I would look forward to sort of conversations on sort of environmental cooperation. The enemy, maybe for me, is not environment itself, but the fact that there is no way for meteorological, the Pakistani Meteorological Society and Indian ones that used to cooperate fairly regularly, that those mechanisms are breaking down. And for those mechanisms to route their way into policy, right, are not there for now, right? And one can look forward to sort of other institutional mechanisms, maybe routed through regional partners, through even Bangladesh and through Sri Lanka, right? So many things can be imagined sort of now, through which these conversations must and need to take place, realizing that there is no way that Delhi breathes until Lahore breathes as well. Right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And yes,
I'd
you
like
can
to-
also mention IOMED, maybe Prabha, because because the audience may not be familiar with it.
So before I get to IOMED, I want to pick up, married as I am to an environmental engineer, air pollution control is a specialty for the last 45 years. It is absolutely true that those are the kinds of very concrete tasks we can take on and collaboratively. It has been my premise for the last 7 to 8 years that the legacy institutions of the previous century no longer work for us, frankly. They simply do not work in the ways that they were established for. And as much as I'm a child who grew up with the UNICEF vans driving around the states and cities that I lived in, the idealism with which it was started, I'm not sure what this is about.
Okay, we should be okay. Yeah.
The idealism with which it was started has to be refurbished in some ways with the kind of ingenuity and creativity that Adam's talking about, right? That we can imagine what a shared future for us looks like. You know, right at the beginning of COVID, as we shut down so much of the traffic in both Pakistan and in India, and people in Delhi started talking about being able to see what they couldn't before of the Himalayan ranges. It was a moment for me of great possibility. And as we look now at the fog indices going up above 600, there should be a shared opportunity for us. And my hope is that events like this bring unlikely partners together. I didn't know of Atish's work. And I'm thinking that's a place where the meteorologists can come together with a shared sense of possibilities. There's no question for me. And I think there are regional entities forming around the world because of the growth of multilateral regional organizations like IGAD, like ECOWAS, like SADC, like ASEAN. There is that possibility for regional entities to come together with new purpose and for them to be led with our cultural shared affinities with music and dance and poetry, which is the only way we gather, with shared food, right? Talk about something that brings people together. Most of the leading mediators of the world will tell you, break bread before you do anything else together. And I will add dance, move together because of the bilateral stimulation. Neurobiology will support why we need to dance and beat the drums together. It allows us to have access to the parts of the brain we don't otherwise. I think you referred to, or I forget if it was Adem or Atish who referred to the reptilian brain functioning over fear, right? So how do you then allow the prefrontal cortex to be forward? It is when you lower the fear and increase the trust. And that comes from all of these things that we can do together. So to speak about IOMED, the International Organization of Mediation, is a structural entity that is based in Hong Kong, started by an amazing gentleman who I had the pleasure of meeting a couple of months ago, with the idea that member states can come together to form panels of experts who can mediate international conflicts, as well as those that affect the corporate sector, particularly multinational companies that are working across boundaries. And my hope is that entities like that, which comprise of member states and organizations like Mediators Beyond Borders, because they asked us if we would provide training for their panelists. And I think we could do that kind of creative work in entities beyond the ones that currently exist.
Great, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Or Atish, did you want to chime in on the point about air pollution or anything that's being done at ICTP on that?
I mean, I don't have much to add, but to say that in the program that we have with India, the Indian Earth Sciences, climate modeling includes not only monsoon, but also includes air quality as one of the issues that they are interested in modeling. So I think there is, I would believe, an area where, for example, if there is a Pakistan Meteorological Institute who is similarly interested, this is an opportunity for collaboration, within what I have called this International Science Alliance.
Fantastic. Yeah. So maybe that will be a way forward to respond to Dr. Shah's concerns. The monsoon training that India is sponsoring to include more of the air quality dimension. All right. I think we are just about over time, but I wanted to also give Sadia an opportunity to provide any kind of closing thoughts based on as someone who is from the community. What might you take forward from today's event?
I think it was, I was very impressed, to be honest. The panel, they talked about really great issues, air quality is a big one back in India and Pakistan that needs to be resolved. Because every time I go back home in Lahore, that's the biggest issue is the air quality. And we all face that. I think platform like this, I think we need to have more platforms like this to make more awareness among both sides, so South Asian, that will help definitely. Because I never thought, with my organization, I never thought that I'm doing something, bridging the gap between them. But I am. And if you think about it, because it is, because we share so much commonality with us, as you said, the food, food is an integral part. So on my, I forgot to mention that my programs usually have samosa and chai, and that's the icing on the cake. So everybody from whoever they come from, like India or Pakistan, so that's the most appreciative thing, they like it. So the food, the music, the art, they just basically bring us together because it's a very commonality between us. We just basically listen to the music and it doesn't really matter who's sitting next to you. You just feel so connected and passionate, you feel the passion. So I think having awareness is what you guys are doing is a great thing.
Thank you so much. And this has given me also hope in the sense that, many years ago when I was a graduate student, I read a book called Water and Power, which was by Professor Miriam Lowy, who did her PhD dissertation at Princeton, looking at the Jordan River Basin. And she came up with a very disappointing conclusion about the role of environmental issues in peace building. She basically said, look, environmental issues and cultural issues for that matter will always be low politics. People will talk to each other, they will meet, they'll cooperate on water, but that will not lead to higher politics cooperation. And I think what she misses in that theory is that, this is a generational process and it is incremental, it takes time, but it's something that we cannot miss in terms of that connection between track 1 and track 2. And I think our panelists have given us hope in that direction. So thank you to all of you for coming, to our online participants, especially Atish staying up late in the evening in Italy. And we will continue this online. Once this is put on YouTube, we're going to spread the word. These kinds of events, especially even though it's difficult to do the online part, but the reason we do it is because they have a much longer tail online. And we will be pitching it very strategically moving forward. And hopefully we'll have maybe some output which comes out of this, some kind of publication. I can see that already Dean has already prepared something in writing, which is really great. As an anthropologist, she had a very articulate narrative there. So we'll try to build on something like that. Prabha also had some really specific written items, and we'll work together on this moving forward. So thank you for joining, and keep in touch. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.